Hey everyone, welcome back to Afro-Asia Diaries. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if you're new here, hit subscribe because trust me, you don't want to miss where this one goes. Let's get into it. Folake Bankole had planned 41 weddings in her career, and she thought she'd seen every kind of family drama a ceremony could hold. Jealous sisters. Broke fathers pretending not to be broke. Grooms who cried in the bathroom 20 minutes before walking out. She thought she was ready for anything. She was not ready for Busan. The contract had come through an agency, clean and vague in the way rich clients' contracts sometimes were. Groom, Song Taeyong, businessman 32. Venue, a private estate outside Houndie, gated, guarded, quiet. The bride's family wanted, and she quotes the email, a wedding that ends the war between our houses. She'd laughed when she read that line. Cute metaphor, she thought. Korean families and their poetry. She should have asked more questions. By the time she landed in Busan, jet-lagged and running on convenience store coffee, she had already fallen a little in love with the city. The way the mountains pressed right up against the sea, the neon signs bleeding into the water at night. She told herself this job was just like any other. Big budget, tight security, a little intense but nothing she hadn't handled. Then she met the bride. Baek Hoon was beautiful in the fragile way glass is beautiful, right before it cracks. She barely spoke during the first walkthrough. Her eyes kept sliding toward the door, toward the guards standing too still along the walls, toward her own brother Baek Ji-hoon, who watched Folake the entire time like she was something to be measured and priced. "You're the wedding planner," Ji-hoon said, not really a question. His Korean was clipped, his English sharper than it needed to be. "Make sure nothing goes wrong tomorrow. For everyone's sake." Folake had nodded, professional smile fixed in place, and thought, strange family. Very strange family. It was Mrs. Han, the estate's head housekeeper, who finally told her the truth in a hallway at midnight, her voice dropping to almost nothing. "You don't know what this wedding is," the older woman said. "This isn't two people falling in love, child. This is the Song family and the Baek family agreeing not to kill each other anymore. That's what tomorrow is. A truce." Folake stood very still, her clipboard suddenly heavy in her hands. "The Songs," Mrs. Han continued, glancing over her shoulder like the walls themselves might report her. "You've heard of them. Everyone in Busan has heard of them. They don't do business, man. They do everything else." Folake's stomach dropped somewhere near her shoes. Everything about the last 3 days rearranged itself in her mind. The guards who weren't just guards, the way certain men in dark suits never smiled, never blinked, never left their positions by the doors. The bride's terrified eyes. The brother's warning. She thought about calling her agency in London right there at midnight in a hallway that suddenly felt too narrow. She thought about the flight home she could still book. But she'd signed the contract. She'd taken the deposit. And somewhere down that same hallway, behind a door she hadn't been invited past, she could hear a man's voice. Low, unhurried, the kind of calm that made the hair on her arms rise, giving instructions to someone in Korean too fast for her to follow. She didn't know his name yet. She wouldn't learn it until the wedding was already falling apart around her. But some small, foolish part of her, the part that always said yes to the wrong flights, the wrong risks, the wrong men, already wanted to. The morning of the wedding, Busan woke up too beautiful for what Folake now knew was coming. Sun spilling gold over the water, cherry blossoms scattering across the estate's stone paths like someone had planned even that. She stood in the middle of it with her earpiece crackling, barking quiet instructions to the florists, and tried very hard to pretend her hands weren't shaking. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes she heard Mrs. Han's voice. This isn't two people falling in love. By 9 the guests started arriving and Folake understood, really understood what she'd walked into. The suits were too well tailored. The bodyguards outnumbered the actual guests almost 2 to 1. Nobody laughed the way people laugh at weddings. They watched each other instead, polite and careful, like everyone in the room was counting exits. That was when she saw him. He came in without an entourage, which should have made him look smaller than the men around him. Did the opposite. He wore black, no tie, and he moved through that garden like the garden had been arranged around him rather than the other way round. broad through the shoulders in a way his suit didn't bother to hide. And his face. God, his face was doing something unfair, all sharp lines and stillness, like he'd trained himself years ago never to let it show anything at all. "That's Song Min-jae," her assistant Rin whispered beside her, barely moving her lips. "The groom's older brother." "He doesn't look like a businessman's brother," Folake murmured. "He's not," Rin said. "He's the reason there's a businessman." Folake didn't fully understand that sentence, not yet, but something in her chest understood it anyway, some old animal instinct that said careful, careful, careful. He looked at her exactly once before the ceremony started. Just once. Across the whole garden, past the flowers and the guests and his own brother rehearsing his vows under his breath, Min-jae's eyes found her and held there a beat too long. Not the way men usually looked at her, not hungry, not rude. Sussing. Like he was trying to work out what kind of problem she might become. Folake looked away first. She told herself it meant nothing. She had a wedding to run. The ceremony began beautifully. Hoon walked out in white, pale as paper, her hand trembling in her brother's arm. Taeyong waited at the altar looking like a man walking calmly toward his own execution, which Folake thought grimly in a way he was. It was during the vows that she noticed the girl in blue, a cousin she'd been told, seated close to the backside, slip away from her chair too quietly, too deliberately, heading toward the catering tent where the security was thinnest. Folake's whole body went cold before her mind caught up to why. She excused herself from the front row, weaving fast between chairs, heart hammering, and reached the tent just as the girl's hand closed around something small and dark tucked behind a floral centerpiece. Wires, she realized, wires that had no business being anywhere near a wedding cake. "Miss," Folake said, too loud, too bright, forcing a smile onto her face like her life depended on it, because some part of her suspected it did. "I need you to help me with the cake table. Right now. Please." The girl froze. For one unbearable second neither of them moved. And across the garden, close enough that she felt it before she saw it, Song Min-jae had already turned his head toward the tent. Toward her. His stillness gone, something sharper and far more dangerous rising behind his eyes. The girl in blue moved fast. Faster than Folake expected from someone dressed for a wedding. She shoved the centerpiece hard into Folake's chest, knocking the wind out of her, and bolted for the tent's side opening. Folake stumbled, caught herself on the cake table, and heard rather than saw the first shout go up outside. Then the gunfire started. Not close. Not yet. Somewhere near the front gate, sharp cracks that scattered the guests like startled birds, chairs toppling, someone screaming Hoon's name. Folake's whole body locked up, every instinct telling her to drop, to hide, to become as small as possible. A hand closed around her wrist instead. "Down," Min-jae said, and pulled her behind the tent's heavy support pole before she'd even registered he was there. His body angled in front of hers, not touching her more than that grip on her wrist, but close enough that she could feel the tension running through him like current through wire. He wasn't panicked. That was the thing that frightened her most. He watched the chaos unfolding across the garden with the flat, calculating patience of a man reading a weather report. "You knew," she said, breathless, accusing before she could stop herself. "You knew this could happen." "I suspected." His eyes flicked to her face just briefly, then back to the garden. "You found the device before my men did." "Why?" "Because it was under a cake I spent 6 hours decorating," Folake said, which wasn't really an answer, and they both seemed to know it. Something almost like amusement moved behind his eyes, gone as fast as it came. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it started. Later she'd learn it was a warning, not an attack, 3 of the Backside's men making a point they hadn't been authorized to make. But in the minutes after, the garden was pandemonium. Overturned chairs, a bride sobbing into her brother's shoulder, guards shouting into phones, Taeyong standing frozen at the altar like the vows had simply stopped meaning anything. It should have ended there. The truce broken before the rings were even exchanged. Instead, Folake heard herself speaking before she'd decided to. "The ceremony isn't over," she said, stepping out from behind the pole on legs that didn't feel steady. "Nobody is dead. Nobody important got hurt. If you stop this now, you're telling every person in that garden the truce failed in the first 10 minutes. Finish it." Let them see it survive something. Min-jae looked at her like she'd said something in a language he hadn't expected her to speak. You're telling my family how to run their war, he said quietly. I'm telling you how to run a wedding, Folake said. That part's mine. For a long moment he didn't answer, just studied her with that same unreadable stillness from the morning. Except now there was something underneath it, something that hadn't been there before. Then he turned, said something low and fast in Korean to the men nearest him, and the garden began impossibly to reassemble itself. Chairs righted. Flowers gathered. A trembling bride walked back to an altar she'd fled 30 seconds earlier. The ceremony finished 20 minutes later, vows shaking but spoken, rings exchanged with hands that wouldn't quite stop trembling. Afterward, while the guests scattered into stunned, murmuring clusters, Min-jae found her again near the empty dance floor, string lights swaying overhead from the earlier commotion. Folake Bankol, he said, testing her name slowly, like he wanted to know how it sat in his mouth. You saved my brother's wedding. I did my job, she said, though her pulse was doing something complicated at the way he'd said her name. No, he said, stepping closer, close enough now that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his gaze. You did something no one in that garden was brave enough to do. That's not the same thing. The space between them had gone very small. Folake was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she hadn't been aware of it in years. Aware of the warmth coming off him. Aware that she should step back, should remember every single thing Mrs. Han had told her in that hallway. She didn't step back. The estate emptied slowly the way a tide goes out. First the guests, murmuring their goodbyes with two bright smiles that didn't reach their eyes, then the caterers, then the last of the cleanup crew hauling away broken chairs nobody wanted to talk about. By 11, the garden that had held 200 people that afternoon held almost no one at all. String lights still glowed overhead, swaying faintly in the sea wind, throwing soft gold shadows over tables no one had bothered clearing. Folake should have left hours ago. Her contract ended at reception concludes. She told Rin to go ahead without her, that she wanted to check the final invoices, which was true and also the smallest possible fraction of the truth. She found herself instead standing near the dance floor again, alone, arms wrapped around a clipboard she wasn't reading, listening to the waves somewhere past the estate wall. You're still here, Min-jae said from behind her, and she startled, though some part of her, the part that had been listening for his footsteps without admitting it, wasn't surprised at all. He'd taken off his jacket. Sleeves rolled to the forearm, top button undone, and somehow that small undoing made him look less like a myth and more like a man who'd had a very long day. Invoices, she said, holding up the clipboard like evidence. At 11 at night. Weddings don't keep business hours. Neither do wars, he said, and something in his voice made it sound almost like a joke, almost like an apology. He came to stand beside her rather than across from her, both of them facing the empty dance floor instead of each other, which somehow made it easier to talk. Your brother, Folake said carefully. Is he safe? Hoon. Safe enough. For tonight. Boss. You're worried about people who tried to burn down your wedding. It wasn't my wedding to burn down. And I don't think Hoon wanted any of this either. She looked. Folake stopped herself, unsure if she had the right to say it. Say it. She looked like someone being married to a war, not a man. Min-jae didn't answer right away. When she glanced sideways at him, his jaw had tightened, something old and tired moving behind his eyes. She is, he said quietly. We all are in this family. Some of us just learn to smile through it. You don't. I stopped bothering years ago. He turned to look at her then, fully, and the space between them felt smaller than the size of it should have allowed. You noticed. Most people are too afraid of me to notice anything at all. I'm afraid of you, Folake admitted, and the honesty of it surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. I've been afraid since the moment Mrs. Han told me who your family was. But being afraid of someone and not noticing them, those aren't the same thing. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in all that careful stillness, brief and unguarded, gone almost before she could be sure she'd seen it. You're not what I expected, he said, when Rin told me a wedding planner had found the device before my own men did. What did you expect? Someone easier to send home. The wind moved through the string lights above them, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. Folake was aware, painfully aware, of how close he stood, of the warmth radiating off him despite the cool sea air, of the low, unhurried way his eyes moved over her face like he was memorizing something he didn't plan on forgetting. "You should send me home," she said, though her voice came out softer than she meant it to. "That's what people do in families like yours. They send the outsiders home before it's too late. Is that what you want?" His voice had dropped, quiet enough that she felt it more than heard it, felt it somewhere low in her chest. He should have said yes. Every practical, sensible part of her, the part that had built a career out of walking calmly into other people's chaos and walking calmly back out, was screaming at her to say yes. "I don't know what I want," she whispered instead, which was closer to the truth than she'd admitted to anyone, including herself, in a very long time. Min-jae reached up, slow enough that she could have stepped back, slow enough that it felt like a question rather than a claim, and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. His fingers barely grazed her cheek, but her whole body went still at the contact, breath caught somewhere it couldn't quite escape from. "Then stay a little longer," he murmured, "and find out." Neither of them moved for what felt like a very long time. The distance between them had become something with its own weight, its own gravity, and Folake felt herself leaning into it before she'd consciously decided to, felt the warmth of his breath, the low hum of something dangerous and inevitable building in the small space left between their faces. Somewhere behind them a phone rang, sharp and sudden in the quiet, and they both froze. Min-jae answered the phone with his back half-turned, voice dropping into fast, low Korean. Folake stood there in the cooling air, arms wrapped around herself, watching his shoulders go rigid line by line as he listened. When he hung up, he didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, jaw tight, eyes somewhere far past the garden wall. "Hoon's brother," he finally said. "Ji-hoon. He's called an emergency meeting with the elders. Tonight. Boss. He's telling them I let an outsider stop a Beck assassination attempt in front of witnesses. That I owe the Beck family for tonight's failure, not the other way around." "That's not fair," Folake said. "You didn't fail anyone. I'm the one who—" "That's exactly the problem," Min-jae said quietly. "You." The word landed harder than she expected. She felt something in her chest fold inward, small and cold. Of course. She'd known this from the first night, hadn't she, that she was a guest in a war she didn't belong to, that whatever this was, standing here under string lights with his fingers still warm against her memory of her cheek, it had never been built to last past tonight. "So I should go," she said. "Before I make things worse for you." "That would be the sensible thing," he agreed, and something in the way he said it made her look up sharply, because he didn't sound like a man agreeing with sensible things. He sounded like a man losing an argument with himself. He crossed the last of the distance between them, and this time there was no hesitation in it, no slow test of whether she'd step back. His hand found her jaw, tilting her face up, and for one suspended second neither of them breathed. "I have spent 10 years, he said, low, rough at the edges, making sure nothing in my life is a liability. Every choice, every alliance, every person I let close. Calculated. Safe." His thumb moved barely along her cheekbone. "You are the least safe thing that has happened to me in 10 years, Folake Bankol. And I still can't make myself want you gone." Her breath caught somewhere it couldn't quite reach air. She could feel the warmth of him, the restrained tension in the hand at her jaw, could see, this close, that the coldness she'd been so afraid of that first morning was really just a man who'd forgotten how to let anyone see the rest of it. "Min-jae," she started, and didn't know what word was supposed to come after his name. "Run now," he murmured, his forehead dropping to rest against hers, close enough that his voice was barely more than breath. "Before I decide to keep you." A ghost of something, humor maybe or its opposite, moved through the words. "I'm not entirely joking." She should run. Every instinct that had kept her safe through 41 weddings and a career built on staying just outside other people's chaos told her to step back now, to go find Rin, to be on a flight out of Busan before the sun came up. Instead she felt her hand lift, slow and settle against his chest, right over the place where his heart was beating far too fast for a man who never let anything show. "Then keep me," she whispered and closed the last of the distance herself. The kiss when it came was slow at first, careful, almost disbelieving, like he'd expected to have to convince her rather than the other way around. Then his hand slid from her jaw into her hair, and hers curled into the front of his shirt, and the careful slowness gave way to something neither of them had the patience to hold back anymore. Somewhere past the garden wall the sea kept moving against the rocks, indifferent to wars and truces, and the two people standing very still in the middle of both, choosing for one reckless moment not to be sensible at all. Behind them, unnoticed, a shadow near the estate gate lowered a phone and turned quietly back into the dark, already sending word to Ji-hoon that the wedding planner hadn't left Busan after all. The E&D for now.